Story 1. As a software engineer, rather than remotely connecting, I could just dial in and download 100 to 200 kilobytes of source code and work on it at home. Security was not a real issue then. DOS text-based software. Story 2. Every box of cereal would have a limited edition collectible mystery mask in it that you have to submerge in water for an hour to activate the filter or something like that. Story 3. As someone who was in high school during 1990, I can say that I think things would have been far worse. People would have had to go to work or not be paid. My mom worked in an office, and there was no way she could have worked remotely. My stepdad was in sales, and you couldn't really do that from home. You think the run on toilet paper was bad this past year? Imagine no internet or social media, and smaller grocery stores, and everyone panicking because they are getting some War of the Worlds type vibe from the network news. Phone lines would have definitely crashed because a strong storm could still take them out. Long-distance calling, at least in the United States, was still expensive, so no hanging on the phone with your friends either. No internet, no streaming services like Netflix. Blockbuster would have been sold out in about 5 minutes. There would have been homeschooling, but it would have really underlined the class divide. Rich kids usually had encyclopedias and lots of books around. Poor kids did not. Most homework involved reading books or looking things up, either in encyclopedias or in the library. I would bet that libraries would have closed. No online shopping means all the things we're having delivered now, like masks and groceries, would have to be purchased by someone going out and getting them. I also agree that martial law would have been a real possibility, if only for crowd control. Finally, for all that we gripe about things, the internet and mobile phones have been an equalizer of sorts, giving us all a way to connect and stay entertained during lockdown. I'm thinking back to my house in 1990, and I would have gone through every book in the house about 45 times by now at least. We didn't have a Nintendo, and we didn't have a computer. We had a very old typewriter, but I'm sure that would have gotten old in about a week. If the library stayed open, then maybe there would have been a glimmer of hope. But with limited phone time and no texting or social media, I feel like small neighborhoods would have banded together in unforeseen ways, some good and some isolating. If you were living in a very poor area, it might have made it worse. If you were very wealthy, it might be like now, where you didn't really notice any real difference, just minor inconveniences. On the plus side, I think the government would have been far more motivated for stimulus payments because people could not work remotely, so they either risked spreading disease or staying home. With not many kids having computers or video games, creativity would have soared because kids have been entertaining themselves in less than ideal conditions since time began. Yes, microwaves and dishwashers were around. My point was that they were a lot more expensive than they are today. We didn't have either, nor did anyone I knew. We got our first microwave in 1991, and it was a hand-me-down from a relative. It also worked only sporadically. We also didn't have video games. I guess today I learned I grew up a lot poorer than I ever thought. Story 4. No lockdowns. The speed at which we got the vaccine is straight-up science fiction compared to what was possible in the 1990s. Sequencing the genome alone would have taken ages. Even after less than a year, everyone is about at the end of their rope. In the 1990s, it would have had to have been stretched over multiple years, so they would have just not done it and hoped for the best. Story 5. No remote learning, no remote working, and a vaccine that would have taken much longer to create. Probably would have resulted in many more deaths even without social media spreading misinformation. People still had conspiracy theories. They just spread slower back then. Might have forced wealthy countries into basic income, while poorer countries would have suffered even more. Story 6. Considering that people wouldn't have social media to air their opinions on, nor the modern-day streaming services, nor Amazon, I think we'd be doing a much worse job of social distancing or similar measures. The biggest difference, however, would be that most people who had no problem doing their job from home on a laptop in 2020 would actually still have to show up at their workplace in 1990. The same is true for students and remote learning. It wouldn't have worked. Story 7. I wonder how much it would spread in the first place. It feels like there was a big jump in mobility in the last 30 years, so it's possible that it would not have spread as far in the first place. However, let's assume it did reach your neighborhood. On the downside, the internet was not really in widespread use, so no work or school from home, and you would have to interact with others. However, on the upside, no internet means no social media spreading false information. There were only a small number of news outlets, and while they weren't perfect, I think they would have given better information than what some people are getting now. There would have been very few claims that it's all a hoax on network television back then, so the general public might take it more seriously. I think President George H.W. Bush would also have taken it seriously, so having the president on television telling you that there is a problem does a lot to convince people that there's a problem. Story 8. Think AIDS. Think how accurate the science was on AIDS initially. Think how people call some of that information ridiculous now and are amazed that people could have thought that way. We even have a common factor in the two diseases in Anthony Fauci. Think about how that affected sex education and supported the push for abstinence-only education. Story 9. Princess Diana would talk about the importance of wearing a mask, and then more people would wear masks too. She helped destigmatize HIV and AIDS. Before her, there was a huge stigma that it could be spread through human contact. Story 10. I have read quite a bit on how the COVID-19 vaccine was made. We relied a lot on research that started in 2005. If this had happened in the 1990s, we would not have gotten a vaccine so fast. There is a misconception that we developed the vaccine too quickly. However, we actually have years of research on it. In 2005, a man started working in his lab to create a vaccine for Middle East respiratory syndrome, which is another type of coronavirus. It wasn't as contagious and basically got swept under the rug, but this individual created the first RNA coronavirus vaccine. We basically just took that research and plugged in the new virus, kind of like how you can plug numbers into an equation that we know is true. This person spent 10 years trying to make the first RNA vaccine, and using his research, we were able to make a working vaccine before COVID-19 was considered a global pandemic. The rest was just perfecting it and testing it. We took no shortcuts when it came to medical trials. We just had a great head start from someone who was interested in Middle East respiratory syndrome. If COVID-19 had happened in 1990, there is a good chance it would have taken years to come up with a vaccine instead of months. We are pretty lucky. I wrote this right before bed, so I didn't get to see this blow up. I'm sorry I didn't do my best writing. I have dyslexia, so sometimes details get really fuzzy and my spelling is not great. I was not just writing about Catalin Carrico, though. She did good research starting in the 1980s. The part 1 was really highlighting was research done by Nianchuang Wang and Jason McClellan. They worked with the Middle East respiratory syndrome virus. Catalin Carrico did not. Catalin Carrico worked more with RNA on its own. Both of these instances were stories of important research not getting funded because it was not deemed important or life-saving enough. Also, all the Middle East respiratory syndrome research done by Nianchuang Wang and Jason McClellan was based on Catalin's research. All three of them worked with either Pfizer or Moderna on the vaccine. I think some people here liked good articles. If you want something to listen to, I would go with the Boulder versus Hill episode of the This American Life podcast. The first half of the episode is about the wild forest firefighters in California, and the second half is about Jason and Nianchuang's research. I'm sorry if I focused on one more than the other or forgot names. I think there are a lot of contributors to creating the vaccine. I really did look into this a lot, but with my dyslexia, it is way easier for me to understand stuff when I also have interesting audio information to rely on. Story 11. Well, there wouldn't be armchair doctors on Facebook spreading misinformation and conspiracies about COVID-19 not being real. So maybe people would actually socially distance and wear masks without claiming their liberties are being infringed upon. Story 12. Well, that was the start of the United States going to Desert Storm at the end of 1990 and 1991, so that would be very interesting during that time. There was not as much social media going on, so there would be less fear spreading so quickly, and we would have had toilet paper and paper towels lasting longer. Story 13. Being stuck at home would be a lot more boring. No video streaming. Also, no remote work because the internet just wouldn't be able to handle the capacity, even if people could set up computers at home. Windows 3.1 would not have been released yet in 1990, so you had Apple computers and that was about it. And it was 24K modems, not even 56K yet, so everything would be slow. Maybe if all you did was paperwork, a fax machine could work, but not well. In short, more people would be infected because more people would need to gather together for work. More people would get bored and go to video stores and libraries. Schools wouldn't be able to close unless the entire area closed because young kids can't study alone at home. It would be a huge issue and a lot worse, especially considering less advanced medical technology. I don't think getting a vaccine out for a coronavirus within a year would have even been possible in 1990. Story 14. The economy would have really taken a larger hit from people not being able to go to work and shop online. There would be fewer deaths and serious cases because of the much smaller percentage of overweight and obese Americans. There would be fewer free spaces for anti-mask proponents to broadcast their latest conspiracy theories, meaning there would likely be more mask compliance. There would likely be higher levels of depression due to the lack of technological capabilities like video calls and online meetings. There would be a quicker response from the president and Congress than there has been in 2020 due to fewer obstructionists. There would have been more criticism toward the gay community because of the stigma attached to HIV and AIDS in 1990, which probably would have been associated with COVID somehow. Story 15. The main difference would be the medical response and time to develop a vaccine. Medical technology has come a long way and many countries are much more prosperous today. As for everything else, it depends on how equal you want to make things. If you assume the virus originated in China, then in 1990 it's unlikely the virus would have left the country for the same reason Middle East respiratory syndrome never became a pandemic. It was a poor country and almost nobody traveled to or from it. Misinformation would still be present, but you would have received it through the mail, fax, over the phone, and through normal conversation. For example, I do not use social media, and I know all about the misinformation as well as other conspiracy theories like flat earthers and fifth-generation technology, because I hear it from people and it's reported on and corrected through reputable media outlets. Story 16. This is a pandemic that the United States specifically was uniquely well-equipped to mishandle, despite knowing what needed to be done and how to do it. Others have discussed social media spreading misinformation. However, the primary method of containing this virus relies on doing things for the benefit of others at a time when the United States is more divided than ever. I truly think we would have fared far better in 1990, especially considering we would have had a more competent leader at the helm. That said, I do not believe a vaccine would have been made as quickly, so I think it could have lingered for an extended period instead of coming in such deadly waves. Story 17. 1990 wasn't an election year, so definitely less politicization. No social media and greater power in local press and news led to less misinformation. Between these two factors alone, I would say you would have a better unified effort in local communities. Regardless of the advances we have today, we would have less noise. That would drive fewer competing judgments, slowing down progress and understanding. Holding the 99% or so survival rate constant, I would say it would have been better managed. Hypotheticals. Story 18. You too would have had an epic global music festival in Berlin in which people cried. The event was televised and raised millions of dollars. Nearly everyone in the world took COVID-19 seriously, and the anti-maskers would have never existed. Story 19. Without social media for people to share their insane theories and propaganda, I think everyone would have taken the pandemic much more seriously. We would not have seen the issues with wearing masks or getting the vaccination that we see now. Plus, we would have had a president that was not useless and a Congress that still knew how to compromise. The main issue would have been that it would be almost impossible for most people to work from home. No remote learning. No streaming media to keep us entertained. Story 20. Well, the name would be different, COVID-89, since I'm going to assume it started at the end of 1989, as this time it started at the end of 2019. So maybe people wouldn't as readily believe there were 88 other iterations of the virus before this one, because I'm assuming tabloids would run that story. Story 21. We wouldn't have a vaccine yet. Most of us, including myself until recently, aren't aware of the persistent work of a researcher on the initial development of a vaccine for the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus. After years of work, he was successful. 5 science journals rejected his paper, finding it had low relevancy. The belief was a flu strain would cause a pandemic, not coronavirus. The 6th publishing attempt succeeded, and a few years later, here we are. Guess whose research was licensed to Pfizer and Moderna? Nianshuang Wang and his partners, rejected by 5 journals, told their work wasn't relevant, now saving the world. This American Life covers them in episode 727. So yes, we have a vaccine in record time, except for the fact it's based on research that took years to complete. As always, the real heroes are invisible.